Commander Jae-woo Park entered his quarters with heavy steps. His body ached after completing his third shift in a row on Frontier Station Alpha. The station was humanity's most distant outpost among the stars, positioned at the edge of explored space. He had just submitted his final report for the day. All he wanted now was sleep. The room was dimly lit with blue indicator lights from various control panels. Jae-woo removed his uniform jacket and placed it on a chair. He didn't bother changing completely, too exhausted to do more than kick off his boots before collapsing onto his bed. The familiar background noise of life support systems soon lulled him to sleep. Several hours passed in peaceful slumber until something disturbed him. There was an unusual weight on his mattress, a depression that shouldn't be there. His military training kicked in immediately. His eyes remained closed as his right hand moved slowly toward the emergency call button located on his bedside panel. "Please," a soft voice broke the silence. "I mean no harm." Jae-woo's eyes snapped open. He quickly sat up, pressing his back against the wall. In the soft blue glow from the status indicators, he saw a figure perched at the edge of his bed. It took him a moment to recognize her. "Hae-yun?" he asked, blinking in confusion. The Viridian diplomat sat perfectly still. Her silvery skin reflected the blue light, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. She had arrived with the alien delegation only 2 days ago. While humanoid in general shape, her species was known for their distinctive metallic skin and large dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Why are you in my private quarters?" Jae-woo demanded, now fully awake and deeply concerned about this breach of protocol. Hae-yun remained perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. "I apologize for entering without permission. It was necessary." Necessary. Jae-woo reached for the light control, increasing the illumination to 50%. He could now see Hae-yun more clearly. Her face showed signs of distress despite her controlled posture. "The power fluctuations throughout the station," she explained. "You may have barely noticed them, but to my species, they are significant. Such environmental changes trigger our survival responses." Jae-woo recalled the minor power issues they'd been having. Engineering had mentioned something about needing to recalibrate the main generator. It hardly seemed like an emergency. "What does that have to do with you being in my quarters?" he asked, his voice stern but curious. Hae-yun's large eyes blinked slowly. "My species requires what we call proximity bonding during times of distress. Without it, our neurochemistry becomes dangerously unstable. It is not a choice, Commander. It is biological necessity." Jae-woo frowned, trying to recall the briefing materials he'd received about Viridian physiology. There had been something about their nervous systems being highly sensitive to electromagnetic changes, but the cultural implications hadn't been covered. "Proximity bonding," he repeated carefully. "You mean physical contact?" "Not necessarily contact," Hae-yun clarified. "Proximity is often sufficient. Being near another sentient being helps stabilize our neural patterns during environmental distress." Jae-woo moved to the edge of the bed, maintaining distance between them. "There are over 300 crew members on this station. Why did you choose my quarters specifically?" Hae-yun's silvery fingers tightened slightly where they were clasped in her lap. "You showed me kindness during our diplomatic meetings. You asked about my comfort, my needs. The others," she paused. "The others look at us with suspicion or scientific curiosity. They see specimens to study or potential threats. You treated me as an equal." Jae-woo considered this. He remembered offering Hae-yun water during the initial diplomatic session, noticing she seemed uncomfortable with the bright lights in the conference room. He dimmed them without making a fuss about it, a small gesture he'd forgotten until now. "This proximity bonding, is it something your people normally do with strangers?" he asked. "No," Hae-yun admitted. "Typically it would be with family members or close associates. I am far from my people here. You were the closest approximation to someone I trust." Jae-woo ran a hand through his disheveled hair. This situation could become a serious diplomatic incident if handled poorly. Allowing an alien diplomat into his private quarters during off-hours violated at least 6 different station protocols. "I should report this to station security," he said, reaching for his communication device. "Please," Heian said quickly. "I understand this breaks your protocols. I would not have come if there were alternatives. The nearest Viridian vessel is 3 days away. I calculated that this approach, while uncomfortable for both of us, presented the least risk." Jae-woo paused, studying her. His training told him to follow procedure, but his instincts suggested she was telling the truth. The slight tremor in her hands indicated genuine distress. "How long does this proximity bonding need to last?" he asked finally. "Not long. Perhaps 1 sleep cycle. By morning, my system should stabilize enough to function until a more appropriate arrangement can be made." Against his better judgment, Jae-woo nodded slowly. "You can stay until morning. I'll sleep in the chair. We'll discuss proper protocols for these situations tomorrow with the diplomatic team." Relief visibly washed over Heian's features. "Thank you, Commander. This mercy will not be forgotten." Jae-woo retrieved a spare blanket from his storage compartment and settled into the room's single chair. As he tried to find a comfortable position, he realized this encounter would forever change his understanding of their alien visitors. What other crucial cultural differences had their briefings missed? "Heian," he said softly into the darkness. "Tomorrow, I'd like to learn more about your people. There's clearly much we don't understand." "Yes," came her quiet reply. "There is much we can teach each other." Jae-woo woke early the next morning. Heian had already left his quarters, leaving no trace of her night visit. He dressed quickly and headed straight to the medical section. He needed answers before reporting the incident. Dr. Soo-bin Kim greeted him with a curious look. "Commander Park, this is unexpected. Do you need medical attention?" "No, doctor. I need information about Viridian physiology, specifically something called proximity bonding." Dr. Kim's eyes widened slightly. "Interesting you should ask. I've been studying their medical files since their arrival." She gestured to her display screen. "What prompted your question?" Jae-woo hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. "Last night, the Viridian diplomat, Heian, entered my quarters. She claimed the station's power fluctuations were causing her physical distress, and that proximity to another being was necessary for her survival." Instead of the alarm he expected, Dr. Kim nodded thoughtfully. "That aligns with what I'm seeing in their physiological data." She pulled up several complicated neural scans. "Viridian nervous systems are fundamentally different from ours. Their neural pathways are highly sensitive to electromagnetic fields and environmental changes." She pointed to a particular region on the scan. "During periods of environmental stress, like power fluctuations, they experience what we might call a neurological cascade. Without stabilizing influence, this can escalate to dangerous levels. And this stabilizing influence is being near another person." Jae-woo asked, leaning closer to examine the scans. "Precisely. Their nervous systems seem to synchronize with nearby biological entities, creating a dampening effect on these cascades." Dr. Kim scrolled through more data. "Fascinating adaptation. On their homeworld, they likely evolved this as a survival mechanism during atmospheric disturbances." Jae-woo felt relief wash over him. So she wasn't making excuses. "Not at all," Dr. Kim said firmly. "In fact, I'm concerned about the entire Viridian delegation given our recent technical difficulties. The power fluctuations might seem minor to us, but for them—" She paused. "I should prepare some monitoring equipment. If these issues continue, we could be facing a medical emergency." "Thank you, Doctor. I need to report this to Director Lee." 30 minutes later, Jae-woo stood in Director Ta Hyun-lee's office, explaining the situation. The director's expression grew increasingly concerned as Jae-woo recounted the night's events and Dr. Kim's confirmation. "Commander, while I appreciate your thoroughness in investigating this matter," Director Lee said when Jae-woo finished, "I remain skeptical. This could easily be a ploy to gain intelligence or access to restricted areas." Jay Wu had anticipated this response. Director, with all respect, consider what courage it took for He-Yun to approach me. She risked significant embarrassment and potential diplomatic incident for her survival. Or she counted on your sense of compassion to bypass security protocols, the director countered. We know very little about these Viridians. Their technological capabilities exceed ours in several areas. We must consider all possibilities. I understand your concerns, sir, but Dr. Kim's assessment of their physiology supports He-Yun's claims. I believe we need to establish proper protocols for addressing their biological needs during their stay. Director Lee drummed his fingers on his desk. I'll authorize Dr. Kim to conduct further research and develop recommendations. In the meantime, Commander, no unauthorized visitors in your quarters. If another incident occurs, you are to alert security immediately. Yes, sir. Jay Wu spent the rest of the morning in meetings, trying to focus despite his thoughts continually returning to He-Yun. Had he made the right decision? The station's alarm suddenly blaring answered that question. Emergency in Section 7. Coolant leak detected. All personnel evacuate immediately. Section 7, where the Viridian delegation was quartered. Jay Wu abandoned his station and rushed toward the evacuation point. The corridors filled with crew members moving in orderly haste, following well-rehearsed emergency protocols. When he reached the main emergency shelter, Jay Wu scanned the crowd. Most station personnel were accounted for, along with several Viridians huddled together in a tight group. But He-Yun wasn't among them. Where is Diplomat He-Yun? He asked the Viridian group leader. Separated during evacuation. The leader responded, his own silvery skin showing dull patches. Different path. Jay Wu checked the shelter manifest. He-Yun had been logged entering Emergency Shelter B, a smaller facility one level down. He quickly notified his second-in-command of his location and headed there. Emergency Shelter B was less crowded, designed for overflow capacity. Jay Wu found He-Yun sitting alone in a corner, visibly distressed. Her normally lustrous silver skin had dulled to an ashen gray. Her breathing came in irregular gasps, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. He approached slowly. He-Yun. She looked up, her large eyes struggling to focus. Calm, Commander, she managed. You're separated from your group, he said, kneeling beside her. The power fluctuations must be worse with the emergency systems active. He-Yun nodded weakly. Cannot. Stabilize. Need. Connection. Without hesitation, Jay Wu sat beside her and carefully placed his hand near hers, not quite touching. Is this close enough? She moved her trembling hand until their fingers barely made contact. Almost immediately, her breathing began to regulate. The ashen color of her skin gradually brightened. Thank you, she whispered after several minutes. The isolation was painful. Jay Wu watched in fascination as her condition visibly improved simply from this minimal contact. He understood then that everything she had told him was true. This wasn't diplomatic manipulation or alien trickery. It was genuine biological necessity. We need to establish proper protocols for your people's needs, he said quietly. No more midnight surprises. There must be a way to address this that respects both our security concerns and your physiological requirements. He-Yun nodded. My approach was improper. I apologize. In my distress, I chose expedience over proper procedure. We'll fix this, Jay Wu promised. Once the emergency is resolved, we'll work with Dr. Kim to develop appropriate accommodations. As they sat together waiting for the all-clear signal, Jay Wu realized how much humanity still had to learn about their new galactic neighbors. Their differences went far beyond appearance or technology. They extended to the very way their bodies functioned in the universe. 3 days after the coolant leak emergency, Jay Wu stood before the station's leadership council. His proposal was simple but unprecedented. Given what we now understand about Viridian physiology, I recommend establishing formal proximity sessions, he explained. These would be scheduled meetings where our visitors can receive the biological stabilization they need in a controlled, monitored environment. Director Lee studied the proposal on his tablet. And who would participate in these sessions? Volunteers from our crew, sir. Those willing to be trained in Viridian cultural protocols. I've already identified several medical staff and diplomatic officers who expressed interest. Dr. Kim added her support. The science is clear. Without these sessions, our visitors will experience increasing neurological distress. It's not just a comfort issue, it's a medical necessity. After considerable debate, the council approved the plan. As the person who had initiated the proposal, Jae-woo volunteered to be the primary human contact for Hae-yun. Their first official session took place in a small meeting room near the medical bay. The space had been modified with softer lighting and monitoring equipment to track Hae-yun's vital signs. They sat across from each other at a small table, both clearly uncomfortable with the formality of the arrangement. "This feels strange," Jae-woo admitted, "like a scheduled medical procedure." Hae-yun's silver skin shimmered slightly as she nodded. "Among my people, proximity occurs naturally within family groups. This scheduled approach is unfamiliar, but I appreciate the accommodation." Jae-woo placed his hand on the table, palm up. Dr. Kim mentioned that physical contact increases the effectiveness. Hae-yun hesitantly placed her hand near his, not quite touching. "This proximity is sufficient. Thank you." They sat in awkward silence for several minutes before Jae-woo decided to make the time more productive. "Tell me about your homeworld," he suggested. "I've only seen images in our database." Hae-yun's expression brightened. "Viridia is beautiful in ways your data cannot capture. Our cities float above the surface, rising and falling with atmospheric currents. Floating cities. How is that possible? We harvest the natural magnetic fields of our planet. Our architecture is responsive, changing with the needs and emotional states of the inhabitants." As she described buildings that shifted color based on the collective mood of the occupants, Jae-woo found himself leaning forward, genuinely fascinated. The hour passed quickly as Hae-yun painted vivid pictures of a world unlike anything in human experience. Their second session focused on Earth history. Jae-woo explained how humans had damaged their planet, then spent centuries restoring its ecosystems. "The Great Renewal took 5 generations," he told her. "My great-grandmother helped replant the Amazon. Now Earth's oceans and forests are healthier than they've been in 1,000 years. Your species perseveres despite limitations," Hae-yun observed. "It is admirable." By their fourth session, the initial awkwardness had faded. They now sat side by side rather than across from each other, their arms occasionally brushing as they shared stories. The monitoring equipment confirmed that Hae-yun's neurological patterns stabilized faster and more completely with each meeting. "Your species fascinates me," Hae-yun admitted during this fourth session. "You lack our perceptual abilities yet accomplish remarkable feats through sheer determination." Jae-woo paused, curious. "What perceptual abilities?" "You've mentioned this before, but never explained." Instead of answering directly, Hae-yun stood and walked to the wall panel. She placed her silver hand near, but not touching, the smooth surface. "Your station's power grid is experiencing micro-fluctuations in Sector 7, she said calmly. "The pattern suggests degradation in the secondary coupling array." Jae-woo stared at her. "How could you possibly know that?" "I can sense electromagnetic patterns. All Viridians can, though some with greater precision than others. It's why the power fluctuations affect us so strongly. We don't just notice them. We feel them throughout our nervous systems." Skeptical but intrigued, Jae-woo logged a maintenance request to check the secondary coupling array in Sector 7. He didn't mention the source of his concern, simply citing anomalous power readings as justification. 3 hours later, Chief Engineer Dong-hyun called him directly. "Commander, good call on that maintenance request. The secondary coupling in Sector 7 was showing early signs of degradation. Another week, and we might have had a serious failure on our hands." "How did you spot it?" There were no alerts in the system. Jae-woo glanced across the command center where Hae-yun was meeting with other members of her delegation. Let's just say we have some new diagnostic tools available. After confirming Hae-yun's ability, Jae-woo arranged a demonstration for Director Lee and the senior staff. Hae-yun walked the circumference of the main control room, identifying 3 additional maintenance issues that the station's sophisticated systems had missed. Remarkable, Director Lee murmured as maintenance crews verified each problem. And all Viridians have this ability. To varying degrees, Hae-yun explained. Some are more sensitive to biological energies, others to mechanical systems. Our perceptual range is part of why we developed our floating cities, to position ourselves optimally within our planet's energy fields. In the weeks that followed, the station's attitude toward the Viridian visitors transformed. What had once been viewed as strange alien customs now appeared as valuable complementary abilities. Engineers began consulting with Viridian specialists before conducting repairs. Medical staff discovered that some Viridians could detect subtle changes in human physiological states before symptoms appeared. Jae-woo and Hae-yun's proximity sessions evolved into working meetings where they developed protocols for human Viridian cooperation. Their initial awkwardness gave way to professional respect, and gradually, to friendship. I never expected our midnight encounter would lead to this, Jae-woo commented during their tense session. They now sat comfortably side by side, no longer self-conscious about the necessary physical proximity. Nor did I, Hae-yun replied. I was merely seeking survival. Instead, we found partnership. As she spoke, her hand rested lightly against his arm, the silver of her skin contrasting with his uniform. Neither mentioned how their proximity sessions had begun lasting longer than the scheduled hour, or how their conversations had expanded beyond professional matters to personal histories and philosophical discussions. The station crew had started to notice their growing connection. Some found it curious, others concerning. But no one could deny the practical benefits of the human-Viridian cooperation that had developed from that strange night when an alien diplomat had crawled into a commander's bed, claiming the survival ritual. The monthly maintenance check of Frontier Station Alpha proceeded normally until it didn't. Jae-woo and Hae-yun were reviewing upgrade proposals in the auxiliary control room when the station's alarm system activated with a harsh, pulsing tone. Warning. Environmental system failure detected. Emergency containment protocols initiated. Before either could react, heavy bulkheads slammed shut with hydraulic finality. The auxiliary control room, designed to function during emergencies, sealed itself off from the rest of the station. Status report, Jae-woo commanded, moving quickly to the control terminal. His fingers moved across the interface as warning indicators flashed across the screen. Primary environmental systems offline. Backup systems at 30% capacity and failing. Communications disrupted. He turned to Hae-yun, whose silver skin had dulled noticeably. Are you all right? She stood perfectly still, her large eyes focused on something invisible. I can sense the energy patterns changing throughout the station. The failure is in the central hub, but the effects are cascading through all systems. Jae-woo accessed the room's emergency protocols. According to these readings, we have approximately 40 minutes of breathable air before carbon dioxide levels become dangerous. Less, Hae-yun corrected, her voice tense. The recyclers are failing faster than your instruments can detect. The energy patterns are deteriorating rapidly. Jae-woo didn't question her assessment. Over the past weeks, her perceptual abilities had proven remarkably accurate. He tried the emergency communication channel, but received only static in response. Communications are completely down. We need to find another way to signal the emergency response team. For 20 tense minutes, they attempted various solutions. Jae-woo tried rerouting power to boost the communication system, while Hae-yun monitored the failing environmental controls. The air grew noticeably thinner as the oxygen recyclers struggled to maintain breathable levels. Nothing is working, Jae-woo admitted finally, wiping sweat from his forehead. Without communications, we have no way to coordinate with the rest of the station. They probably don't even know we're trapped here." Hei-yun approached him with unexpected urgency. Her normally calm demeanor had shifted to something more intense, more focused. "There is another aspect of proximity bonding I haven't shared with you or your medical officers," she said. "It's not merely physical presence that stabilizes our neurochemistry. Under certain conditions, it can create a temporary neural connection between participants." Jae-woo stared at her, trying to understand. "You mean like telepathy? Mind reading?" "No, not exactly." Hei-yun's silver hands moved in a complex gesture, trying to explain a concept that had no human equivalent. "More like shared processing. Your problem-solving abilities combined with my perceptual awareness. A joining of complementary cognitive functions. Is this common among your people?" "Only in emergencies. The process requires both physical and mental vulnerability. It is not undertaken lightly." She glanced at the environmental monitors. "We have perhaps 15 minutes of usable oxygen remaining. With your consent, we might find a solution together that neither of us could discover alone." Jae-woo hesitated only briefly. "What do you need me to do?" "Remain still and open your thoughts. I will initiate the connection." Hei-yun stepped closer and gently placed her silver hands on either side of his face. Her touch was cool against his skin. As their eyes met, Jae-woo felt a strange sensation, like the moment before falling asleep, when consciousness begins to dissolve. Then, abruptly, the world expanded. Jae-woo gasped as his perception transformed. He could suddenly feel the station's systems as living networks of energy and matter. Power conduits pulsed like veins through the station's structure. Communication relays sparkled like neural clusters. He could sense the other people aboard the station. Bright concentrations of bioelectric energy moving with purpose. Simultaneously, Hei-yun's consciousness merged with his own problem-solving approach. Her perceptual data flowed through his analytical framework. Together, they identified patterns invisible to either of them separately. There, their shared consciousness recognized. A maintenance access path existed between the auxiliary control room and a secondary communication hub. It didn't appear on any official schematic because it had been added during a previous emergency repair and never properly documented. Without speaking, they moved in perfect coordination. Jae-woo removed a floor panel, while Hei-yun reconfigured the room's remaining power to provide emergency lighting. The narrow passage beneath the floor was barely large enough for one person. Jae-woo went first, crawling through the tight space with Hei-yun following close behind. Their connection allowed them to navigate in near darkness, sensing the path rather than seeing it. After several minutes of difficult progress, they reached a junction point where several maintenance tunnels converge. Jae-woo could feel Hei-yun's certainty guiding them toward a specific access panel. Together, they removed the panel and found themselves in a small equipment bay adjacent to the secondary communication hub. Still operating in their joined state, they quickly reconfigured the communication equipment. "This is Commander Park and Diplomat Hei-yun. We are trapped in Section 12B with failing life support. Request immediate assistance." The message transmitted just as the emergency response team cut through the sealed bulkhead from the other side. As rescue personnel flooded into the area, the neural connection between Jae-woo and Hei-yun gradually dissolved. The expanded perception faded, leaving Jae-woo disoriented. The world seemed duller, more limited than it had been moments before. "Are you all right, Commander?" A medical officer approached, scanning him with a diagnostic device. "Yes, I'm fine," he answered automatically, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. He looked for Hei-yun and found her receiving oxygen from another medical officer. Their eyes met across the room, and he knew she was experiencing the same sense of loss. Later, after medical examination confirmed both were physically unharmed, they met in the quiet of the observation deck. The stars provided the only illumination, casting soft light on Hei-yun's silver features. "What we experienced," Jae-woo began, struggling to find adequate words. I still have echoes of it. Impressions of how you perceive the world. He-Yun nodded. The connection leaves traces. They will fade with time. Do I seem different to you now? Yes, she admitted. I understand you in ways that cannot be explained through ordinary communication. Your thought patterns, your emotional responses, they've become part of my own experience. Jae-woo looked out at the stars, wondering how this shared experience would change their relationship and the future of human-Viridian relations. Thank you, he said finally, for sharing that ability with me, for trusting me with something so intimate. It was necessary for survival, He-Yun replied, but they both knew it had been more than that. It had been a choice, a decision to trust across the boundaries of species and culture. News of the environmental systems crisis and the remarkable human-Viridian cooperation that saved Frontier Station Alpha spread rapidly through both civilizations. The once classified security footage showing Jae-woo and He-Yun working in perfect synchronization became a symbol of interspecies potential. 2 weeks after the incident, an official delegation from Earth arrived at the station. Admiral Kang, head of Earth's Space Exploration Division, personally presented Commander Jae-woo with the Distinguished Service Medal. Commander Park, your willingness to embrace new protocols and alien methodologies saved hundreds of lives, Admiral Kang announced during the formal ceremony. Your actions represent the finest traditions of human exploration and diplomacy. The Viridian High Council sent their own representatives, who presented He-Yun with the Silver Resonance Honor, their civilization's highest recognition for cultural advancement. More significantly, they officially appointed her as the first permanent Viridian ambassador to human space. During the following months, Jae-woo and He-Yun worked tirelessly to formalize what they had learned through their experiences. They drafted the Proximity Protocol, a comprehensive framework for cross-species cooperation that addressed both the biological needs of Viridians and the security concerns of humans. The protocol established clear guidelines for proximity sessions, cultural exchange programs, and joint emergency response teams. Most importantly, it included carefully regulated procedures for the neural connection process that had saved their lives. The neural connection must remain a tool of last resort, Jae-woo insisted during a planning session with the Joint Scientific Committee. It's too intimate, too profound an experience to be used casually. He-Yun agreed. Among my people, such connections are reserved for moments of great need or deep trust. We must respect the cultural significance while exploring the practical applications. Research teams formed to study the process under controlled conditions. Early results showed remarkable potential for emergency response scenarios and deep space exploration. Human problem-solving combined with Viridian perceptual abilities created teams capable of unprecedented achievements. Station Director Lee, once skeptical of the Viridian presence, became one of the strongest advocates for expanded cooperation. What began as an accommodation for alien visitors has become our greatest strength, he noted in his quarterly report to Earth Command. The complementary abilities of our species have improved station efficiency by 37%. 4 months after the crisis, the Earth Council and Viridian High Command jointly approved funding for a permanent research facility. The Joint Species Research Center would be built in neutral space between their territories, dedicated to exploring the full potential of human-Viridian cooperation. Construction proceeded rapidly. Engineers from both species incorporated design elements that accommodated Viridian sensitivities while maintaining human comfort standards. The result was an entirely new architectural style that combined the best aspects of both civilizations. 6 months to the day after He-Yun had first entered Jae-woo's quarters, they stood side by side at the dedication ceremony for the completed research center. Hundreds of humans and Viridians gathered in the central atrium, a testament to how much had changed in half a year. As the formal speeches concluded and the attendees mingled, Jae-woo and He-Yun found a quiet moment near one of the observation windows. Below them, teams of silver-skinned Viridians worked alongside humans, their movements harmonious and purposeful. Did you ever imagine this outcome when you crawled into my bed that night? Jae-woo asked quietly, watching the activity below. Hae-yun's silver skin shimmered with what he now recognized as amusement. Our proximity ritual teaches that survival often comes from unexpected sources, she replied. I needed proximity for my own survival, but I never anticipated it would lead to the survival and prosperity of both our kinds. Jae-woo nodded, remembering the confusion and awkwardness of that first encounter. From emergency to opportunity, I've been thinking about why our species work so well together. And what have you concluded? That we've each evolved to perceive different aspects of the same reality. Humans see patterns over time, planning and building for futures we can imagine but not sense directly. Your people perceive the present with extraordinary depth and richness that we can only measure with instruments. Hae-yun considered this. Together, we experience a more complete reality than either species can alone. A human scientist approached them, accompanied by a Viridian researcher. They presented early results from a new project combining Viridian sensitivity to gravitational fields with human theoretical physics. The potential applications could revolutionize space travel. As the scientists departed, Jae-woo noticed Hae-yun watching him, with an expression he had come to recognize. She was sensing his emotional state. You are contemplating something significant, she observed. I was thinking about fear, he admitted. How close we came to missing this opportunity because of fear and suspicion. If you hadn't taken that risk. And if you hadn't responded with openness rather than alarm, she added. Around them, the research center hummed with activity. Teams of humans and Viridians moved through the space with purposeful energy, their former differences now sources of strength rather than division. The universe's greatest gifts often arrive in the most unexpected ways, Jae-woo reflected. Sometimes even in the form of an alien seeking shelter in the darkness of night. Ha-yun's hand brushed against his, a brief touch that carried echoes of their deeper connection. Perhaps that is the true lesson we should share with both our peoples. That what first appears as intrusion may in fact be invitation. As night fell on the new research center, lights from human and Viridian quarters illuminated the darkness of space, a beacon of possibility in the vast unknown. The end.